And that's the one thing I would say I totally agree with. Like you know, metaphorically, you put the microphone in someone's face and they can talk for hours and hours, right? Because
Mhm.
you're asking them to talk about themselves. You're asking them to share their story. And I feel that everyone has a story.
Yep.
And for you, Jen, I'll look at podcasting and I'll let you comment. I'll look at podcasting as this. You're the voice to so many people who may not necessarily want to speak their truth,
Mm.
may not necessarily want to share their story, but you give them an opportunity to do so. And the best example I can give, outside the interaction that you and I had before this, was that I've dealt with people that have been physically abused, sexually abused,
Right.
broken marriages,
Mhm.
childhood trauma. I've even interviewed swingers,
I
right?
need to I need to listen to that episode.
Yeah, it's coming out soon.
Okay,
But
good.
but I point that out because it's sometimes you live in your own echo chamber, meaning that you only know what you've lived,
Right.
but you've opened up your eyes as well as me and all everyone who's out there who's in this medium to a whole different world. And you made a good point, whereas a black man in Canada is different than a black man in the United States, is different than a black man in the United Kingdom. A black woman, same thing. A white woman, same thing. A brown woman, same thing. And sometimes we get caught up in thinking that, well, I'm this way in my little city, so everyone has to be the same way around the world.
Exactly.
But that is definitely not the case. And in regards to your experience, Jen, has there been a moment along this journey where you're sharing all these stories, where you're like, that was an aha moment. My eyes have been open to something that I didn't necessarily consider up until now.
I think the one thing that I get stuck on is when I record the podcast and I pick my guest and I'm like, oh, this person has an amazing story, and I send them questions in advance and we start talking, and they go in a path that's different than I thought it was going to go. So, for example, one of my guests, Alyssa McDonald II, she was severely burned over a good chunk of her body when she was a young child, and so I thought this was going to be this very like, I don't know, gut wrenching, deep, sad, the story of triumph and just anguish and pain. And I was just ready for this very deep, dark story. And we laughed the entire time. I think we barely talked about her accident and how she got burned, and we just laughed. And so I think that's something that I love about the podcast, and something that I've learned is just because you think somebody's story is going to be a lot of times it's B. And I think that's what we get from hearing each other's stories, is that what you assume or what you think or what you imagine somebody else's experience should be or will be could be so different once you hear it directly from them. Yeah, I truly was ready to have this. I had tissues on the table. I was ready to hear this gut wrenching story, and I don't. We laughed the entire time. She is hilarious.
Do you think you would be prepared for that type of scenario where it's a lot of tears and a lot of anxiety? Maybe. Do you think you prepared for that? Because I know I'm not. I'll tell you that from now.
First of all, I don't think that's true. You have a very calming, like, let me learn your story and ask questions. I think you've got like the heart of a counselor. So I don't think that's true. But I think I'm naturally curious, and I think I'm hopefully am comforting and empathetic. And if we got to the point where somebody was emotional, um, yeah, I welcome it. It hasn't happened yet. I think most people are excited to tell about their wins. Um, versus the trauma. I think people have definitely gone through it, but I think they like talking about being on the other side of it versus being stuck in it. And so yeah, I've had several guests where I'm like, oh, it's going to be the one of this guest another guest I had, she was adopted. She's black, and she was adopted by a white family when she was 3, and the family adopted her siblings as well. And so they're in Ohio, so I thought it was going to be this very like deep story about race and ethnicity and how she was raised in family and being in between. And she plays rugby now, which is a predominantly white sport, and she's a woman. And I just thought it was going to be this deep, like, dive into race and transracial adoption. And no, we talked about her family for about 2 seconds. She said, they love me. They gave me the life that I have now, and I'm not going to squander it. I'm grateful for what I have. I know what my life could be, so I'm going to make it as best as possible. And that was it. I really thought we were going to have a 40-minute conversation about her family. We talked about it for 3 seconds and moved on. So, yeah, I think giving people the opportunity to tell their story their way is been a great learning experience for me too.